Louisiana's first legal execution using the electric chair was in 1941. Louisiana's electric chair, nicknamed Gruesome Gertie, was used for 87 executions between 1941 and 1991. It was retired in 1991 when the state switched to lethal injection. In 2024, Louisiana reinstated electrocution as an execution method, along with nitrogen hypoxia. The electric chair is now housed at the Louisiana State Penitentiary Museum in Angola. The electric chair used in Louisiana was nicknamed Gruesome Gertie by death row inmates. Louisiana banned the electric chair in 1991, citing a court challenge that deemed it an unconstitutionally cruel and unusual punishment. In 2024, the Louisiana legislature reinstated electrocution as an alternative execution method, alongside nitrogen hypoxia. The 1940 Louisiana legislature changed the method of execution, making execution by electrocution effective from June 1, 1941. Louisiana's electric chair did not have a permanent home at first, and was taken from parish to perform the executions. The electrocution would usually be carried out in the courthouse or jail of the parish where the condemned inmate had been convicted. Notable individuals executed in the chair include Toni Jo Henry, the only woman executed in Louisiana's electric chair. Toni Jo Henry. Henry was born Annie Beatrice McQuiston, in Shreveport, Louisiana, on January 3, 1916, the third of 5 children. She lived with her grandmother for a while her mother was ill. Her mother died of tuberculosis when Henry was 6 years old. After her mother died, she lived with her father and stepmother, although always wanted to return to living with her grandmother. She was bitten by her father when she got home that day and resolved to leave home for good after this. She soon got drawn into drugs and prostitution. Prostitution was one of the few things she could actually do. Toni Jo Henry was petite and very pretty with jet black hair, so getting customers was not a problem for her. By the age of 16 she was smoking, drinking, taking cannabis and associating with Shreveport's underworld. Toni Jo Henry was arrested several times during her teens, including once for assaulting a man, but avoided prison by virtue of her age. In 1939 Toni Jo met Claude "Cowboy" Henry at the Shreveport brothel, where she was now working full-time, and fell for him immediately. He was down on his luck, and Toni Jo Henry felt instantly attracted to him. Cowboy had a criminal record, but was also on bail awaiting a second trial over the shooting of an ex-police officer, Arthur Sinclair. Toni Jo, by this time, was addicted to cocaine, so they made a great couple. Cowboy succeeded in getting Toni Jo off the drugs, and they got married on November 25, 1939 in Louisiana, with Toni Jo using her real name. Cowboy took her on honeymoon to Southern California, but their marital bliss was short-lived when he received a telegram to appear in court in Texas on the shooting charge. Cowboy turned up at the court despite Toni Jo's pleas to him to go on the run with her, and his second trial also ended in conviction. In January 1940, Cowboy was sentenced to 50 years in the Texas State Penitentiary at Huntsville, a sentence which shocked and infuriated Toni Jo, who had believed all along in her husband's story of self-defense and his almost certain acquittal. On hearing the sentence, she vowed to get him out of jail, and thus embarked on a series of the most amazing criminal acts which in reality had no hope of success. Toni Jo then began contemplating plans to break her husband out of Huntsville prison. She recruited an accomplice, an ex-con and Army deserter, named Harold "Archie" Burks. Toni Jo had contacts in the criminal underworld in Louisiana and southern Texas, and immediately started making plans to spring Cowboy despite being warned that the idea was hopeless. Toni Jo Henry was staying in Beaumont, Texas to be near Cowboy and teamed up with a young man named Harold Burks, who was known as Arkansas or Arky, as she called him, had served a sentence in Huntsville and was presently absent without leave from the Army. He claimed a detailed knowledge of the jail, and together they decided that they could get Cowboy out, who claimed to know the layout of the penitentiary. The pair devised a plan to rob a bank, in hopes of securing money to aid in breaking Claude Henry out of jail. Two teenagers were persuaded to break into a gun store and steal guns and ammunition for them to use. Joseph P. Calloway was delivering a Ford coupe to a friend when he happened upon Toni Jo and Arky Burks, who were hitchhiking. Unaware of their plan, he offered to give the two a ride. They planned to steal a car and then rob a bank that he knew in a small town in his native Arkansas, to pay for the expenses to be incurred in springing Henry. They armed themselves with pistols which Toni Jo had got a couple of acquaintances to steal for her from a gun shop, and posing as newlyweds hitched lifts towards Arkansas and their target bank. By the evening of the 14th of February they were in Orange, Texas, and were looking for the right car, and then along it came. Joseph P. Calloway was delivering a new Ford V8 coupe for a friend when he saw them and decided to offer them a ride. The Ford was perfect for their purposes, new and fast for its day, capable of outrunning the police when the jailbreak came, so they thought. Toni Jo Henry, finding herself deserted, Toni Jo decided to use the last of the stolen money for a bus ticket back to Shreveport, Louisiana. She looked up an old friend who ran a brothel there and who persuaded her to go and stay with her aunt. The aunt clearly realized that Toni Jo was in trouble, but was only able to glean fragments of information. Worried, she decided to tell her brother, who was a policeman, but found that he was on vacation. So she explained her concerns to one of his colleagues, Sergeant Dave Walker. Walker accompanied the aunt back to her house where he interviewed Toni Jo. He was aware of Mr. Calloway being reported missing, but completely unprepared for the full confession he was about to hear from Toni Jo. She even gave him the revolver with one fired and 5 live rounds still in it. Walker was disinclined to believe the confession, as no murder had been reported and no body or the car found. He decided to arrest her and handed her over to the Lake Charles police, who took her out in a car to try and locate the body of the man she claimed to have killed. Eventually they located the correct spot and found Mr. Calloway's body just as Toni Jo had left it. The bullet that killed him was recovered at the autopsy and was found to match the gun the Walker had taken from Toni Jo. The Ford coupe was soon discovered abandoned in Arkansas and still containing Mr. Calloway's clothing together with cigarette ends with lipstick on them. Toni Jo was formally charged with murder, but refused to give any details of her accomplice because she was displeased at the way she was being reported in the press. Eventually she was persuaded to talk, and Arky was soon arrested and brought back to Louisiana and charged with the murder too. They were to be tried separately. Toni Jo's first trial opened in Lake Charles on March 27, 1940 before Judge Hood, and attracted huge press coverage. She was described in the press as a sultry brunette. In it she tried to shift the blame for the killing onto Arky, but the jury didn't believe her, and after deliberating for 6 hours on Friday, March 29, 1940, she was guilty of murder, for which there was at the time a mandatory sentence of death by hanging. Toni Jo showed no emotion at the verdict. She was later formally sentenced to death by hanging. Arky was also convicted at his trial later in the year and sentenced to death. Toni Jo's execution was set for Saturday, November 28, 1942 at 12:05 p.m. She was to be executed within the basement of the Lake Charles prison in Louisiana's portable electric chair, which had been brought by truck from Angola prison the previous day. Hers would be the 6th electrocution carried out in the state. She had chosen a plain black dress which was brought back from the cleaners that morning and black pumps. She was said to have cried when her head was shaved and had requested and was allowed to wear a brightly colored scarf to hide her baldness. Kenny Reed, the deputy sheriff, in charge of her, read her the death warrant and asked her if she had any final statement. She replied, "I think not," and was then led to the execution chamber, holding Father Richard's hand. She admitted to being somewhat nervous and afraid but went calmly to her death. Several press reporters were present and she managed a smile for them. She was allowed to pray for a few moments, and then Sheriff Henry Reed Jr. asked if she had any last words, to which she replied no. She smiled at her executioner and mumbled a few words inaudible to the witnesses as she was strapped into the chair. The electrodes applied to her shaven head and her calf and a leather mask put over her face. A moment later 2,000 volts hit her, and at 12:12 p.m. she was certified dead by the parish coroner, Dr. E.L. Clement and Dr. H.B. White, the prison doctor. Her body was removed a few minutes later. Her last request was that a crucifix be left in her hand when she was buried. Father Richard officiated at her burial at Orange Grove Cemetery in Lake Charles and designed the headstone for her grave. Archie was executed in the same electric chair on March 23, 1943, despite Toni Jo's belated efforts to take responsibility for the murder after she had lost her final appeal. No relatives came forward to claim his body, so it was buried in an unmarked grave. Cowboy was released from prison 2 years after his wife's execution. On July 15, 1945, Cowboy Henry was shot and killed in a brawl with a barkeeper. During its 50 years, Gruesome Gertie was used for a total of 87 executions. It now sits at the Louisiana Prison Museum in Angola, Louisiana. Gruesome Gertie was reinstated in 2024, along with the addition of nitrogen hypoxia. Thank you for watching Death Row.